Hey, today's question comes from Jeffrey, who's launching a SaaS product and asked or said, there's plenty of ways to get AI to generate content ideas, but I want AI to go further. I want it to create ads and content, let me review and choose which ones I like, and then automatically post them to channels like Reddit, LinkedIn, and X. Is there a way to set this up so that AI creates content? I approve what gets published, and then it posts everywhere without having to manually handle each platform. So I would separate this into separate questions or jobs to be done. I would separate the ads from the content. I honestly can't speak to the ads piece. I know that there's a bunch of platforms out there that have tried to be AI ad makers where they've each had their own sort of unique approach to creating ads, whether it's based off of which ones are actually performing well within Meta or TikTok, and then trying to use those to reinforce and invent more creative. I have not heard great things about any of them. In general, we're in a moment where there's a lot of hype. What I can speak to though is on the content generation piece, and then we'll call it the orchestration process. Here's what I think most people get wrong. They think that the challenge is the orchestration and scheduling and connecting APIs. That's actually pretty trivial. The real challenge is content quality and whether or not any particular solution meets your standards. And that depends entirely over how much control you want over style, tone, voice, if you care about it sounding exactly like you versus you wanting the content to exist. There's a bunch of automation platforms out there, whether it's Zapier, N8N, or Make. I feel like I've used a million of the things that are out there on the market. I think that Lindy sits in the middle, and you can get both the orchestration as well as the prompt level control. And there's a lot more that I know can be done than what I've built in this proof of concept, but hopefully this is helpful for conveying how you could approach it. I've separated into the content generation and then the content publishing. Now, there are certain parts, whether you're using Lindy or any of these tools, where it's easy to have a recurring schedule to do anything, right? Every day at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, do this. Part of what was cool, and I can show this later, around Lindy is I was able to actually give the Lindy agent of what I wanted to accomplish from a workflow perspective. And it actually built out most of this workflow. I then went in and I modified stuff and gave it clarification and corrections. But by and large, I didn't actually have to build out a lot of this by hand. I did some tweaking, but I was very impressed by the Lindy agent where you explain what your workflow is. It will essentially put together a proof of concept, a functional proof of concept that you can continue to refine and tweak. So if you look at the Lindy, I separate it into content generation, content publishing. The content generation, what it looks like is you have this ability to create essentially an agent and you can give it a prompt. I used another LLM, I think I maybe used ChatGPT or Claude, where I created a prompt that said you were creating content that's designed for, after analyzing his website, went through and was like, all right, who do I think his ICP is? What's the type of content? I created context from what the product is, who the ICP is, the types of topics that I think are relevant to their business, core value proposition, core features. And I used AI to analyze his website for a lot of this. I went in, again, with most of these things, edited it using my own judgment, but was able to get like a general baseline. And then I gave it a task, giving the agent context around what are we doing? And so the task includes researching current trends related to his business. I said that I want to create content ideas relevant, and I mentioned each specific platform. LinkedIn, I gave it a target around 150 to 200 words, business insights. We were speaking to founders. Similar thing where for direction on X, I said I want punchy threads that are formatted, 3 to 5 tweets, conversational, relatable, excuse me. And then, and this is a key part of it, is one of the things that Jeffrey had mentioned was that he wanted a human in the loop where the AI generates this stuff and then he can approve it. So the simplest way to do this in general, hands down, regardless of what your use case is, Slack. And Lindy has a great Slack integration. So the way I built this out is that in the morning, it comes up with 4 or 5 different content ideas based off of the business. It sends me a Slack message. I actually created a channel called Content Generation where it posts to the channel a thread of 3 or 4 different topics. I can then reply in line in that thread to approve or revise any of these topics. Once I've approved it, I have a separate trigger that detects that I've approved something, and then it will do the content publishing. But just to take a minute to focus on the initial content generation piece, which is, again, the most complicated, right? What I would actually want to do if we're building a production version of this is use like an RSS feed that is used to inform the content ideas, where it's pulling from a feed that I'm probably curating of topics that are relevant to my industry that I want the AI to use as inspiration, as opposed to just doing its own research, which, again, I think I'm using Perplexity as its research source, but like me being able to curate it gives a little bit more control over the different topics and stuff like that. And so as you can see, I'm scrolling through here on the screen share showing, I gave some rules around the content itself, 3 ideas, how I want 3 drafts per platform, meaning LinkedIn, X, etc. The tools that it has in its disposal, the format of how I want to present me the different ideas, how it should deal with feedback handling. So again, like this is actually an agent within Lindy. So you're treating this just in the same way that you might give instructions to an agent within N8N or ChatGPT. And you can see below here, the model I'm using is 4.5 Haiku Claude. I could change it, probably should change it to Sonnet again. And then below here, you can see the different skills I selected, where the ability to chat with the agent, where I can give the refining messages. It has access to Perplexity. It can run code. It can interact with Slack, where it can both observe messages, send to a channel, and then send replies. Now, the second part of this is the approval trigger, where actually it needs to, I haven't actually posted any of the content since it's not for my business, so I didn't hook up the channel for approval, but I'll pull up Slack and you can actually see that for the last few days when I first built this, have been getting daily content. So let's pull this up, where every morning I get messages that come up with these different ideas for different channels based off of different topics that it's come up with, where I can reply for feedback or revisions. If I were to reply, what I would actually do is do it in thread like this, where I can reply and approve or give it revisions. And what will happen is the AI will take my feedback and it will revise it based off of what I said, and it'll present me with more options. The last couple of days of drafts it sent me, and they're decent. If it was my business, I would obviously want to go through and verify all this, which again is the whole point of Jeffrey's request around the human in the loop piece. And the other part here that I would want to do is to reinforce feedback so that future posts take into account feedback. And again, you can do stuff like that from a content generation. I would add additional step, probably again, as I said, pulling from an RSS feed with not only an RSS feed of research topics and articles that are timely. I'd probably also have an Airtable or Notion database with approved posts that I want the AI to use as examples of good, in addition to the style guide and content themes that I already gave it here. So again, this is a fairly static example of this. And to zoom out, I also want to show you, for me to generate this agent, what I actually did was I went to Lindy, I went to the chat, and then you can see my original basic instruction to it that I had used AI to write. And I think when I was talking to AI, I was probably using ChatGPT or maybe even Claude, where I was like, I'm instructing an AI agent to build out this flow. I took Jeff's original request around what his ideal flow was, and then I added some specificity, as I said, around scraping his site, assuming that who I thought the ICP was, and then incorporating into it some best practices around tailoring content to each platform that he requested, around target length for LinkedIn, structure, etc. The folks at Every have done a lot of great content around how to use AI to actually write in your voice. And for folks who want real control over to what extent does the writing reflect your own style? Does it come across as AI? That is really where the most amount of complexity is. It's not on the orchestration part, because it's fairly simple to, from a publishing perspective, use a tool like Typefully or whatever, which has an integration with Lindy, as well as a lot of these other platforms, where you can connect Typefully to LinkedIn, to X, to a bunch of other platforms, and it will schedule and publish on your behalf. The OG is Buffer, right? That is, again, I'd say fairly commoditized. The challenging part is really the creating of the content that is good. And then how do you, and then being able to continue to have the controls to reinforce examples of good and bad writing so that it continues to improve and learn upon what you've built. Now, what I can do is I can share a version of this that others can use. Happy to share that. I think even within Lindy, there's a way to share flows. I'll remove Jeff's business from it. But yeah, I think I built this out in about 15 minutes. I'll go back to this example where this is the prompt. Then you can see as I'm scrolling down, got me an error, but then I gave it some clarifying saying you can schedule publishing to X, Threads, and LinkedIn versus Typefully. So then it updated its own agent. Then it went through, gave it some more feedbacks, and like you should take any revisions based off of responses to draft, revise, and present them back to the user in the Slack until they ultimately approve it. The agent made more changes to the Lindy flow and then explained. So it was not as simple as just telling it what to do and it just did it perfectly, which I don't think any of us are expecting, but it built out 90% or 85% of the orchestration part fairly accurately. And in my tests, it worked almost like on a one shot. Now the challenge again was the improving the content. And I think you can get fancier around providing a like Airtable database of good examples that maybe you continue to update. And maybe every post that you ultimately publish automatically gets added to that Airtable. And then you can also have an RSS feed of timely category relevant or business relevant topics that you want the AI to be taking in consideration so that the content that it's writing about and the themes are not only just timely, but also relevant, curated by you. So hope that's helpful. And if you have any questions or of how you might tailor this to yourself, feel free to drop me a message. And if you have any AI questions that are burning with your team, feel free to submit them. Until next time. So if you take anything from this, I hope it's that the orchestration part is pretty easy and commoditized across any of these automation platforms, and that the content quality is what's hard. And so you should pick a platform that is based on how much control that you want over like the prompt engineering and style refinement. A tool like Lindy, especially with their chat-based agent workflow, is a solid middle ground. And so like this would be in 15 minutes. I think the functional proof of concept of how I'd go about eliminating 90% of the work generating content with AI and still keeping a human in the loop.